Thanks, Chair. Thanks to our witnesses. Mr. Bai, you were talking about the need to accelerate approvals of certain products. And it's interesting, I had a meeting with the Alberta Irrigation District last week, and they have a herbicide that they want to use that they've been asking for decades to get. In fact, it's been used in the United States since the 1960s, but still PMRA has blocked approvals here. But we've also heard from PMRA that it takes up to 12 years to get products approved in Canada. For the Innovation Council, what kind of an impact, have you done an analysis of the economic impact that these types of delays have had on innovators and the agriculture industry in Canada?
No, sadly, we haven't done that analysis, Mr. Barlow, but for the chair. But we have heard many times that the delays in approval of products have been detrimental for not only innovation but for our economic competitiveness, and that is indeed a significant challenge for everybody.
You appeared before committee last Parliament, and we talked about the Liberals' border carbon tax, which they've had once again in this election platform, and they are talking about implementing that again. With the current tensions with our trading partner south of the border, would this be a good time to implement a carbon border tax?
No, I still don't think it would be. I think at this point, I think most of the industry believes in a harmonized approach on this. And in the end, should we decide to go in that direction, I think it's going to end up hurting our own Canadian consumers, drive inflation even higher, and create more challenges for everybody than needed. I'm not sure taxes are the answer to everything in this case.
Yeah, you had, at that appearance, you suggested or recommended not going ahead with the border carbon tax because of the inflationary measures that would have and increasing food costs on consumers. Do you still stand by that recommendation?
100%.
Dr. Charlebois, thanks for being so nimble in your presentation today. But similar line of questioning. You published a research paper last year on the carbon tax and its impact on the supply chain. They still have an industrial carbon tax in place. Have you done any work in terms of what the impact of the industrial carbon tax is on the supply chain and the food costs in Canada?
Well, our study, if you recall, was focused mainly on the industrial carbon tax, the part that most consumers don't see. That's been our concerns from day one, looking at the wholesale prices. And since the publication of both of our studies, because we published two papers, the gap between wholesale prices in Canada versus the U.S., food wholesale prices have actually increased. So, and we believe that one factor driving this is the carbon tax. And so we're very concerned, and of course we're looking at food prices into 2026 right now with Canada's food price report. And again, we don't, at this point, we feel that we actually may provide Canadians with some bad news for 2026, but we are expecting food inflation to continue to be a problem moving forward.
So are you going to give us the answer before the reports come out on December 4th?
Not yet. December 4th.
Okay, we have to wait? Okay, fair. Now, it's interesting that you raise this because, timing is everything, but it came up a number of times, a question period today about the industrial carbon tax and the front-of-pack labeling and the plastics food ban, the impact that has on food prices. The Liberal ministers in their response said, here the Conservatives again are talking about imaginary taxes on food. But you yourself have said in your research that the industrial carbon tax does have an impact on food prices. Would you say the same about the front-of-pack labeling and the P2 plastics ban, which the Deloitte study, it said, but the combined would be about $14 billion in additional costs. Would you agree with that assessment from Deloitte and the industrial carbon tax would have an impact on what consumers are facing at the grocery store shelf?
I would, yes. I do appreciate why the government is doing what it's doing, because it wants to better products. It wants to be seen as a good environmental steward. But at the same time, with more policy comes more red tape and more costs. And this is the trap that we've fallen into several times over the last few decades, and here we are now. If you look at, say, the G7 right now, we're the only country within the G7 which has seen 4 consecutive months of a food inflation rate increase. So we're not going in the right direction right now.
I appreciate that. And Mr. Lemaire, I know this is right up your alley. You've talked about this a lot too. Although the government's talking these are imaginary increases, I'm assuming you would agree that a P2 plastics ban, the plastics registry, and the front of pack labeling are all having an impact on the costs consumers are facing at the grocery store.
30 seconds. Driving change. The other issue is we start looking at the administrative burden to the point of the registry. Last week, Environment Climate Change Canada was at an event and noted that there were only 1,000 companies registered for the plastics registry nationally. Last time I looked, there were many more companies than 1,000. And why don't we have a high pickup? It's because of the burden, the cost, and the challenge in understanding actually how do they go through the process when they're already involved in EPR programs in many of the provinces.
5 minutes. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I'll start with you, Professor Charlebois. You identified, and I know there's sensitivities in the room around what we would call food taxes, so I'll just change my language for the purposes of the room, call them food policies, around the food policy of industrial carbon tax, the front of pack labeling, the plastics registry. 2 more on my list, obviously are the clean fuel standards that impacts fuel costs, and obviously the deficits that inflate everything. What other taxes, specific around food? You mentioned shrinkflation. You mentioned the underreporting, actually, of food inflation, possibly because of shrinkflation. What other taxes are there that are directly or indirectly impacting the food cost for Canadians?
I mean, we could look at corporate taxation, but based on what we've evaluated with MNP, looking at G20 countries, Canada is actually already competitive. The challenge, of course, is that we are in a vast we are in a vast country, so we have to make our country immensely attractive to attract more investments, which is really the biggest problem that we have, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to innovation, creating opportunities for Canadians, and providing, actually attracting more competition to reduce
Let me put
prices.
some of your own words right back at you. Valley of Death, the distance between proof of concept and commercialization. And in your opening comments, you talked about public sector investment is seemingly not getting the job done because private sector R&D investment has dropped off 37% since 2023. Why?
Because we can't scale up businesses. I mean, I was at Purdue University just a month ago teaching a class to entrepreneurs, and in the room you had several companies looking at investing because they know that they can actually launch and scale up their businesses very rapidly, which attracts VCs very much. In Canada, we're very good at starting businesses. We're not very good at keeping them.
I'm going to switch to Mr. Lemaire. Plastics registry and the interplay, the interchange between federal and provincial. It's a challenge in a whole bunch of situations. And what hasn't been coming into the testimony here with respect to plastics, particularly single-use plastics, and as provinces look at that, is the idea of recycling. Is there a linkage between, is that one of the problems, that's provincially regulated, the recycling aspect with plastics? Yeah. And how do we get around that?
So
or address it is a better word.
Thank you, Mr. Epp. So the concept of recycling, we have a systems issue with plastics. This is the underlying challenge across the country. And the systems issue is, we want to create a circular economy, but we don't have the infrastructure and the modeling in play to do so, to actually create enough resin and move forward. When the tariffs were put on China by the U.S. around some of their recycled content, all of a sudden there was a massive move to try and buy as much recycled content as possible for plastic manufacturers because it was going to be extremely expensive to move forward, and it's already a challenge with virgin resin. So we need to look at a system in Canada that looks at how we create our own internalized model, drives business back to the investment. So how do we get the capital, get the private equity models in place and move forward? Atlantic Canada, Sustain. It's an operation that takes all sorts of plastics. They put it into their operation and they create new material that can then be sold, and they're actually selling it overseas. It's a $70 million startup, and they're having a challenge to get there. That's a good operation opportunity.
Thank you. I want to get one other thought in, and that is, broadly speaking, many of the challenges, particularly in this study, we've dealt with for 10 years. It's a culture change that we're looking for, specifically in the two agencies that we're focusing, CFIA, PMRA. What is it needed? I think of the 4 R's: right place, right time, right amount, and what's with the other, and whatever. Right, our regulations are good, but we're not fast enough in adopting them. We're not fast enough. So what is needed? I'll start with you, Mr. Charlebois.
I think it boils down to understanding execution, the value of execution. Industry is very good at innovating, but often it's held back by regulations. And whenever we actually decide to empower industry with new technologies, we're not very good at communicating that to the public. And then you hear it from them, parliamentarians. You're the ones that will actually just step back and be more prudent about what you're trying to achieve, which makes things even more complicated. And so this is really the trick here, is to actually understand in lockstep how can we actually have industry and regulators work together and communicate that to the public in real time.
You're going to cut me off, so.
No.
Go ahead.
Give you some extra seconds to answer, so thank
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. I will ask you to disregard my. Ça va? I'll ask the committee to disregard my opening statement because I actually wrote an opening statement for another session. So I made some notes that are going to be relevant to today's session about bureaucracy and the administrative regime that actually impacts our agri-food sector's competitiveness overall. So I'll make 3 points to start things off today. One is Canada's competitiveness compared with other G20 countries right now. As it stands, taxation would be my second point, and third point will be about shrinkflation. So let's start with Canada's competitiveness. Recently, we've had the pleasure to prepare a report with the firm M&P. A document was submitted to the committee, to the clerk, in both English and French. I'm not sure if you did get a copy of that report, but it was submitted to the committee. But the abstract of the report is simply this: Canada's competitiveness is actually strong right now. Out of 20 countries, including the EU, Canada ranks number 7th within that group. So it is the number 1 country within the second tier. So there are lots of things that are going our way. I would say traceability, food security overall compared to other countries. But 3 things that came up in our report that would probably warrant some attention by the government. One, there is a tendency in Canada to use policy to build competitive advantages, to allow our farmers, processors to compete. Based on what we've seen elsewhere around the world, other countries don't necessarily use policy to build competitive advantages, because it is our belief that if you do that, it is not a competitive advantage, simply. 2, the lack of capital investment. From the public sector, it's been quite decent, to be honest, in the last several years. In particular with the supercluster proteins industry. Canada is a good example of a supercluster that I believe is working well for our farmers and the sector, but the lack of private capital is really hurting our competitiveness overall compared to other countries around the world. And lastly, infrastructure. Our infrastructure is in dire need of investment, from ports to railroads to roads. There is a severe deficit of investment across the country, from the Maritimes where I am to BC as well. Some of our ports are ranked the worst in the world when it comes to efficiency. My second point is about taxation. Our fiscal regime in Canada is burdening our companies, burdening our farmers, and also burdening our our consumers. A lot of products are taxed at the grocery store, taxed at the restaurant. I certainly would recommend this committee to look at taxation overall from farm gate to plate. The GST holiday policy earlier this year was a good example of how fiscal policy can actually impact food affordability when, based on our evaluation, when the GST holiday was implemented in December, it allowed for some opportunistic pricing to occur, meaning that a lot of companies raised prices to occupy that gap. And when the GST holiday ended in February, well, the GST was slapped back on higher prices. So we need to be careful with taxation because it is a powerful tool that is actually controlled by the government. And also one thing related to my third point, shrinkflation. Because of shrinkflation, there are more and more products being taxed. They are, a lot of products are considered as food when they get smaller, according to CRA rules, they become snacks, and snacks are taxable. So there's a growing number of products that are being taxed at retail. But the worst part of shrinkflation, other than the fact that consumers are annoyed by the practice, I would say, is the fact that Statistics Canada's ability to truly assess inflation, I think, is flawed. We believe that often inflation is underestimated by Statistics Canada. Because of shrinkflation, when you look at the basket of goods, you often see that quantities don't reflect exactly what's in the grocery store, for one. And based on our analysis, often Statistics Canada lags in terms of assessing the true measure of inflation. And on that, I'll stop now and allow other witnesses to testify.